in a little bit. This is an inspiring story about resilience and transformation. And this book follows the journey of Adeniyi Adesokan, who overcomes a series of personal challenges, including strained family relationships, mental and emotional hardships, and adapting to life in a new country. But I'm not going to say everything about the book. The expert and the author of the book is Adeniyi Adesokan. Adeniyi, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being with you today.
Absolutely. So do you mind just telling the viewers a little bit about who you are before we go into why you're here and the book you wrote, and I'll ask a few more questions about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Adeniyi Adesokan, everyone calls me Ni. I'm originally from Nigeria, as you can tell. I was born and raised in Lagos, and I spent probably the first 21, 22 years of my life in Lagos. And had, like many people, had ambitions around what I was going to do when I grew up. So finished the boarding school in Nigeria, and spent some time in college in Nigeria. And the plan was to join the military and become a military officer. Because I grew up in a military family. My dad is a retired naval officer, and so life got in the way, and plans changed, and I found myself eventually moving to the United States in the late 90s. And then I've lived here ever since. I'm a mechanical engineer by background, married with 3 kids, and I live in the US now over the last few years.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that introduction. So Ni, I was talking about the introduction about the book that you wrote. So can you tell us just a little bit more about the light within, extracting beauty from life's ashes?
Yes, and thanks for that kind of introduction. I think you covered it quite well. So the book it traces the story of a character named Adeniyi Adesokan that just went through some very, very difficult challenges over his life, and could never seemed able to catch a break. But maintain a sense of resilience and discover the power of forgiveness along the way to get to the other side. And I can share a little bit about how that came about, but it's a story about sort of never giving up, and even when things seem pretty dark, how do you find that light? How do you find the positive in a set of circumstances that you never expected, and how do you get through it, and how do you keep your faith while you're going through that process? It's a book that I'm really proud about, and I hope people might draw inspiration from.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I like the title, The Light Within, Extracting Beauty from Life's Ashes. I think it's a powerful title. It resonated with me. So my first question for you is, what inspired you to write this book?
No, I love that question. So a few years ago, so right out of college, I went to work for a company in the automotive industry. So a company that made generators and diesel engines, etc. And so I'd been I was young in my career, maybe 5 years working as an engineer at the time, and I got this request to come sit on a panel to talk about the title of the panel. So this was a panel for the employees. They usually have them every so many quarters. And this was and the topic for that particular panel was turning life's lemons into lemonade. So sort of theme around sort of resilience and bouncing back from difficulties, etc. And so first I was wondering, why me? And then I saw the list of the other panelists, and there were 4 of us on the panel. 3 of them were vice presidents in the company. And then there was me, the young engineer that had only been working maybe 4 or 5 years at the time. And so I was extremely nervous because I knew the theme was talking about how they overcame challenges in their careers, at work, etc., and how they navigated through that. So I spent the weekend trying to figure out, what am I going to talk about on this panel? I've only been working for 4 years, 5 years. I haven't particularly overcome any big career challenges. Certainly nothing that would be comparable to what these folks have been through. And so I was really cracking my brain. And then finally I decided I won't even talk about work at all. I'll just maybe share a personal story about how I overcame personal challenges and how I found myself where I ended up in that company and in the United States. So that's what I did. So the final came. There was maybe 200 employees in this big hall. Each of the VPs shared their story, and then it got to me. I was sitting at the very end of the panel. And so I shared this little story about growing up in Nigeria and running into a lot of certain circumstances and having to navigate those, and how I ended up where I ended up. And if I'm being honest, I was super nervous. I was just trying to get it over with so I could get off the stage.
Stage fright?
Stage fright, and then what surprised me was the response of the audience. I noticed, through my nervousness, I noticed how sort of captivated people were, and people were listening, and towards the end, some people were crying, and that really touched me. And then people would come over afterwards and were like, "Oh, thank you for sharing your story. Really, really, really appreciate it. I think you should write a book." And this was maybe 12 years ago, right?
Okay.
I think you should really write a book about this. And in my mind, I was like, write a book? Like, how am I going to write a book? Like, only writers write books, right? Regular people don't write books. They were like, you should think about it. You should think about it. And so I was like, oh yeah, flattered, but yeah, I'm not going to write a book, So, but I was really touched by that particular event. So then fast forward 10 years later, it's COVID, right? We're all locked down, and I'm hanging out with a bunch of friends from college in Nigeria, and we would meet up at like a beer garden every so often. And, we're just sort of sharing stories growing up and how you ended up in the US and things like that. So I shared a similar story to what I shared 10 years earlier at that session. And then I got the same response. Dude, you really need to write a book about this. I'm like, yeah, thanks. They're like, no, I'm serious. You need to write a book. So I was like, okay, I'll think about it. I'm just trying to get them off my case, right? And then, well, your Nigerian buddies, right? The next day, they're texting me, dude.
No chill.
Well, yeah, exactly. They're like, no, we're not joking. You need to write a book. I was like, guys, I heard you. Like a week later, what's the status of the book? I'm like, what book? And they just would not let it go. And so finally, that's when I decided, okay, maybe there's something here. Maybe it's a story worth sharing, and maybe it's something that people can draw some inspiration from. So that's how the journey started. Now, it took a long time to finally get it to publication, but that was the beginning of it.
Thanks, and we'll get back to that in terms of your creative process. We'll get back to that, but and you sound like a storyteller to me, because you told a story, you linked it to the answer, and you're a natural storyteller. It's just that you had to put the work into writing a book, but you're a natural storyteller. So I like the way you answer that question. So I'm assuming, I don't want to go into assumptions, but I'm assuming this is your first book?
Yes, it is.
Okay, it's your first book. Yes. So my next question is, as a first-time author, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced during the creative process or the writing process, and how did you overcome them?
Yes. So a few things. Some things were sort of my natural apprehension about writing a book, the fear of failure. Like, I'm not a writer. I've never written a book. I'm an engineer by background. Writing is not typically sort of our strongest suit. So that initial apprehension, just getting started, was a bit of a challenge. I knew what I wanted to say. And like you said, I like telling stories, but I didn't really know how to structure it and how to put it on paper and what does the first chapter look like. I was trying to figure all that out. But probably the hardest part for me was, and if you read, when you read the book, there's a big part of it around family dynamics. And probably the biggest thing that held me back, even 10 years earlier, when I was first told about that, when those folks encouraged me to write the book, was I was worried about how telling that story would impact my family. And the different dynamics and the concern about how my family would receive it. And that for the longest time was almost a blocker that didn't even let me really think about doing this. And so I think getting past that initial hurdle to say, okay, will I alienate my family? What would that mean? Would I create more harm than good? I had to mentally get through that first. Right. And then at some point I decided, you know what? I'm just going to do it, right? I'll let the chips fall where they do, right? So then I started, and then really thinking through so the way I got around what it might mean for my family and those impacted in the story was I decided to write it. So I actually started the first draft of it as a pure biography, sort of first person storytelling. And then later on I decided, you know what, I'll write it almost like fiction. right? Write it about the character of somebody, drawing inspiration from my experience. And so that was one way I said, okay, I could maintain maintain anonymity with some of the characters. And so that gave me a bit of freedom to then use some creativity around the characters and things and places and times and things like that. So that was my way of getting around some of my initial concerns and fears. And once I got past that, then I started putting drafts together, thinking about what should be the first chapter and the last chapter, mm-hmm. things like that. I'll tell you, there was a lot of rewrites, and there were many times when I would go a week or two or three and not make a whole lot of progress. And then my friends will text me again and say, "What's the status?" I'm like, "Oh man,
no pressure."
Exactly, no pressure. Right? And because we used to meet like once every month or so, I almost dreaded meeting with them again because I knew they were going to ask me what's the status. And so finally, I think where I began to make progress was when I decided, you know what, I'm just going to set a routine. Right? This whole start and stop thing is not working, right? Sometimes I'll go a month without writing. It just wasn't working. And I have 3 kids, married, a demanding job. So it wasn't like I had plenty of time. So finally I decided, okay, every Friday, I'll put it on my calendar. I have to do some writing every Friday, whether it's a page, a chapter, whatever. I have to do something every Friday. And so that's what I did. And that's when I finally felt like I was beginning to make good progress. So every Friday I'll find a coffee shop, sit there for 2-3 hours, just put some things on paper, revise it a bit, and that's when I really began to make some progress. And then I gave myself a deadline. I said by the end of this year I want to be published, and eventually I said to make some progress. Overall, it took a couple of years from that conversation in that beer garden to publication was about 2 years. So it took a whole lot longer than I would have liked to, but eventually.
Well done. Thank you. You finished. That's the most important thing. You finished.
Precisely.
You finished.
Precisely.
So you talked about chapters earlier in this question, and you said something about rearrangement, which will be the first. So which chapter of the book is your favorite and why?
I would have to say it's chapter 7, because chapter 7 is when. So Danny's life had sort of taken a lot of, good turns, bad turns, and he up until then he overcame a whole lot of challenges to get to where he was. And at that point in his life, he felt like he had actually hit the jackpot, right? He had actually gotten to his dream school. He was ready to pursue his career as a military officer. Everything was going great, right? He was on top of the world. And chapter 7 was when everything took a turn, right? This was a chapter where his life, literally, the direction of his life, the trajectory of his life, really took a turn. Chapter 7 is very action-packed, with a lot of suspense, and usually most people will say they came away with that thinking, did this really happen? Like, did this guy really go through this? So I think chapter 7 is certainly my favorite.
That's your favorite. Okay. So guys, you're going to buy the book. I'm going to put the link for you to buy the book. And when you buy the book, don't go straight to chapter 7, right?
Exactly. Try to resist temptation.
Start from chapter 1, but chapter 7 is, you get it. It's loaded. Yes. Thanks for that. And how did you mentioned being a mechanical engineer earlier on, and you're still a mechanical engineer, I assume. Did that influence your writing process in any way? Because you said, one of the things that you had in your mind was how, you don't, maybe you do drawing of the engineering diagrams, I assume, and other things, but not writing the way a writer would write. So do you think that helped, or do you think that hindered your creative process? Or you had to just take what you do in your day-to-day life, take it away, and then wear a hat of a writer? Yeah.
I think it hindered initially because, by nature, engineers are very sort of matter of fact, just get to the answer as quickly as possible sort of people, right? And so I think my first few drafts, after I wrote them, I had a friend that we worked together. She's a colleague. She happened to be a marketer. She works in marketing, and I've always appreciated the way she uses words and sort of talks about what the customer wants to hear or see. So I figured she would be the best first person to read through this, right? And by this time, I had written my first chapter. I was feeling very proud of myself, like, finally, I have something to show somebody. And I sent it to her, and she sent me back a whole bunch of recommendations, and it was a very long list of recommendations. I was like, oh no, I still have a long way to go. But the
As in,
key
I've not
thing,
started.
I haven't even started. I haven't even started yet. It's called first draft for a reason. I was like, yeah,
Yeah.
okay. But the key theme with what she was talking about was, she said, you have a very powerful story here, but you're not given enough. It's one thing when you're describing something verbally, right? You can sort of get people in the mindset of where you are, and sort of people can feel being there. She said, I'm missing that. You're telling a story, but I can't visualize these places. I can feel the smell of these places and what it looks like, and what Lagos looks like, what Abuja looks like, what Zaria looks like. I need you to help me see that. And as an engineer,
that visual depiction in your mind, right?
Precisely. Like, how do you put that on paper, And so I read that. I was like, I don't even know how to do that, right? I'm just telling you what happened, right? I'm not describing the environment and the smell and the feel and the tension. So that was probably my biggest challenge. So that's when I needed to take off my engineer hat and sort of wear the storyteller hat and really think about, if I was telling you the story, how would I describe it in a way that you feel like you can actually visualize it and almost like you were there? And so that's the part that took a while. So a good chunk of those two, the editing process for me was that. Like, how do I make people feel like, they know what Zaria looks like when they've never been to Zaria? Maybe
when they've never been there.
Precisely. How do I make sure they know what Denny's parents, are like, even though they never met them, right? What are they like in terms of, what they look like physically? What are they like in terms of personality? Filling that gap was a bit of a challenge, but eventually very, very fulfilling to be able to do that.
Excellent. Thank you. And then this book, The Light Within, Extracting Beauty from Life's Ashes, it deals with themes of hope. It also deals with, themes of redemption. How do these themes reflect your own personal journey or experiences? And why I asked that question is, when you gave an early answer, you said something about you started you started this book with an autobiographical lens.
Yep.
But because of a couple of things, family dynamics, like you said, you decided to write in a third voice, or write in someone else's voice, and then alter a few things. But so how do you think these themes reflect your own personal journey or experiences?
Yeah, so it's very, it draws a whole lot from my personal experience. So I took creative. I took creative. So I was creative with locations and maybe timing. The character names, obviously, things like that. But the core part of the story reflects heavily on my personal journey. And so a lot of the experiences that Danny went through are either very similar or certainly mirror some of the experiences that I went through to get to today. And so writing it was very personal. It required a lot of reflection and having to, in some cases, bring back memories that I've maybe tried to suppress over the years.
Wow.
Certain things I actually had to, call family or friends to say, I'm trying to remember what was happening when I did this, right? Because over the time I realized that maybe part of my coping mechanism going through all this was suppressing certain things and almost trying not to remember that certain things happened. So I have to actually go back and say, I remember vaguely something like this happening. Do you remember that happening, or was it just my imagination? And that was it was quite going through some of that, bringing back some of that trauma was quite challenging. So I would say a whole lot of parallel between Danny and the experience that I went through growing up.
And the experience that you've had. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And why do you believe people should buy and read The Light Within?
So after the book came out, there's a young man that I mentor. He lives in Nigeria, and he got a copy of the book, and he read it, and he called me after he read it, and he said, "Wow, I really appreciate you writing this book." So I said, "Thanks. What was your takeaway? Why do you say that?"
Mm-hmm.
And he said, and so growing up, I knew him growing up, sort of like, Nigeria now, family of a, family friend, but we call each other cousins, that sort of thing, right? I don't necessarily know even now we're related, but, everybody's a cousin. And so he said, growing up, I always thought you had it all figured out. You grew up in a relatively comfortable family. My dad, retired, fairly highly ranked in the military.
Mm-hmm.
I just always thought your life was this bed of roses, and reading this, and he had a very challenging childhood. He grew up in a very difficult situation, maybe a whole lot worse than I ever even went through to some extent. And so he said, reading this really gave me a whole lot of hope, because I always thought, I grew up in this circumstance. Everybody else has got it better than me, and but reading it and realizing. And seeing you today, realizing you went through all that and still came out the other side, gives me a whole lot of hope that maybe, there's life is a whole lot more than what I've taken it to be. And he said, and my biggest takeaway is I need to reconnect with my dad, was what he told me. He said, I haven't talked to my dad in probably 10 years. I need to reconnect with my dad. I need to I need to bring that relationship back one way or the other. And that was, for me, part of the reason for writing this book, right? I'm hoping to inspire people to really take to heart the strength, the power of forgiveness and redemption, and the idea that it's never too late, right? No matter what we're going through, no matter what has happened, it's never too late to get back on track. It's never too late to forgive and reconnect with loved ones that we've had fractured relationships with, to inspire people that even while you're going through what you're going through, there's light at the end of the tunnel. That's my hope that people take away from this. And
thank you very much. And I co-sign what Ni has also said. Why should you buy? I recommend that you pick up this book. I'll put the link and where you can get this book. You can get it from his website and get it from some other stores as well, online. So for me, this book, like Nini just said, is a relatable story about resilience, forgiveness, personal transformation, and hope, right? The fictional character in the book, Adeniyi, had very difficult circumstances. There's nobody in this world that hasn't or isn't facing or hasn't faced difficult circumstances, be it family tension, be it emotional struggles, be it adapting to new environments. But this book shows how persistence and focus can help anyone turn setbacks into stepping stones. Then it also tackles, themes of growth, second chances. Like I said, forgiveness. One of the readers who read his book was so compelled to reach out to his father, who had an estranged relationship, and possibly without that book, probably a lot of human beings had spoken to him, reach out to your dad, this and that. And it took the power of reading behind somebody else's struggle, especially somebody who he knows personally, to make that happen. So imagine the people that have been touched by reading this book. So I implore you to go out and get this book. It's all also relatable. Like you heard me speak, things that happen in his own life and, his own struggles and how he was able to overcome them. This book is well written. It's engaging and it's enjoyable and relatable. So I believe and I recommend that you should pick up this book. A couple of more questions for you, Nii, before we let you go. I'm sure you're very busy. I can see books in the background, so we know that you're or they CDs. They look like books.
A reader.
Definitely a reader. So you mentioned it took about 2 years, and you mentioned moments where you would not write a word for a month, and then you had to, you wanted to finish it. partly because of the guys in the beer garden. Let's not lie.
Yep.
Yes,
Yeah, they're a huge part of it.
Get them off your back.
Get them off my back.
But really, because you don't want to start a project that you're not completing, and this is also close to your heart. This is something that you wanted to finish. So my question is, did you experience writer's block, what they call in a community writer's block, or moments of doubt during the creative process? Not just you not writing for a month, but even what to write and how to write it. And like you said, where does the book start? Where's the so what? How do you answer the so what? How do you put in the cliffhanger so that people can move from one chapter to the other? So how were you able to do that and succeed in it to the end, to the point that you were able to finish the book? Yeah.
Finish the book. Yeah. So self-doubt, absolutely, right? Throughout the process, I would read it over and over. And I'm like, man, I still don't feel like it's compelling enough. I don't know that people will read this. And why would anybody care to read this book? So a whole lot of self-doubt. And I found myself multiple times thinking, maybe I should just stop, right? Like if I don't finish it, nobody would know any better besides the guys in the beer garden, and life will move on, and it's like it never happened. But there was just, you just had that thing behind you, right? Where you're like, you don't start something without finishing. The other thing I did that kept me going, my kids knew I was writing the book, right? And so they would always ask, Daddy, how's the book coming? And, how's it going, Daddy? And this and that. And the one thing you always want to do is set good examples for your kids. Right. Yes. And you never want to start a project, because that's what we tell our kids, right? You don't start something and not finish. So how does Daddy then not finish what he started? So that was my extra, rocket fuel. Like, I have to make my kids proud. And so one of the things I would do is I would read. I think I rewrote the first chapter 3-4 times. I would read it and I was like, what would make a reader want to go to the next chapter? Like, what is that story that would make the reader want to go to the next chapter? And so one of the big changes I made was, initially I'd started the story in a linear fashion. And that's my engineer mindset, right? Like I just sort of started the story where the story started. Oh, growing up, where you were born, blah, blah, blah. And then I said, nah. And then I started to draw on, I love like thrillers and movies and things like that. I started to draw on, what I usually like about movies, or even, shows, where sometimes they almost start with the end in mind, right? And then they sort of trace back, how did we get here?
Like right?
Flashback, etc. So that's when it then hit me is, I actually want to start the story with the end in mind, right? How did that, big events, fantastic day, a lot of, excitement and drama and things like that. And then sort of work my way back to, how did this guy get to that particular moment in time? Right? Because then I knew, once you read about that first chapter about Danny and what happened that first, chapter, then you want to know, how did he get to that location? How did he end up there? And why was he so worried about, this or that? Which then justifies you having to read the rest of the chapter. So for me, that was a big aha moment once I figured that out. So it took a couple of rewrites to get to that point. But yeah, that was one big turning point.
Thank you. And how has the feedback impacted you so far? I mean, you talked about how touched you were by your mentee and what he said to you about reaching out to his dad. But what other emotions went through you from the feedback you've gotten from other people that have bought the book so far? And how has that impacted you?
The feedback has blown me away, if I'm being honest, right? Like, people will read, because sometimes, folks read it and, maybe it's your family and, of course your family will say you did a good job, right? But getting feedback from people I don't know, or Amazon reviews from people that I don't know has been humbling, to say the least, right? I think the best feedback I've gotten is some version of, I'm not even a reader. I don't like to read books. And when I got this book, I was thinking, oh man, it'll take me a few weeks to read it. And then I found myself staying up till 3-4 a.m., reading this book, and I'm not even a reader. For me, that's a huge compliment. The fact that people have made comments to the extent that, once they started it, they didn't want to stop until they finished it. I finished it in 2 days, and normally it takes me weeks to finish a book. So yeah, certainly, obviously, feedback from family, but even more gratifying is feedback from strangers. Absolutely.
Excellent. And where can people buy this book? You mentioned Amazon just now.
Yes.
Where are the places where people can pick up The Light Within, Extracting Beauty from Life's Ashes? Where can this book be bought?
Yeah, so Amazon, obviously, Amazon UK, Amazon US, Amazon, pretty much where Amazon is present, you can get from Amazon, but also other bookstores, Barnes & Noble, for those that are familiar with them, Books A Million, for those that are familiar with them. So anywhere that you can get sort of your big book websites, you can pick it up from there. You can also go to my website, Adeniyi Adesokan, at adeniyiadesokan.com, and you can read a little bit about the character, the story, but also you can order it through there as well. But yes, Amazon will probably be the easiest because everybody shops on Amazon, I think.
Yes, absolutely. And this brings us to the end. Adeniyi Adesokan, I've had a blast. Viewers, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this to as many people as possible. Nee, where can people link with you? Do you have any social media handles that you want to? I'll put it on the screen, but just share with the audience so people can reach out to you. Maybe some people, guys, buy this book. I'm not kidding. So buy the book. So and they want to give you personal feedback, maybe your IG, maybe Facebook. So where can people?
Yes, those will be the two easiest places. So I'm on IG at Adeniyi Adesokan, and I'm on Facebook as well. And either one of those would be perfect places to get a hold of me. I'm usually very responsive. I respond to comments from readers and supporters. So I would love to hear from you on your feedback, and I'm looking forward to it. And for you, loved this podcast, enjoyed the conversation. Subscribe if you haven't already. I just love the themes and some of the topics that you cover. I've really enjoyed getting to listen to a lot of your podcasts, and I really appreciate you having me here today.
Thank you very much. And I'm echoing the same. I really, really enjoy this. And thank you so much for gracing the occasion. Viewers, I'll see you in the next one.